My name's Byron Sheffield. I'm the project manager here at Leyton 6th College. Ideally, I would be doing this presentation or supporting this presentation, and Nicole from NewVic 6th College, one of our partners, would be leading it. And that's because Leyton were involved in a couple of action research projects, but this one was very much driven by NewVic and by Nicole. But unfortunately, she's not able to do that. So you've got me doing this all the way through. We're slightly different from quite a lot of other people here in that we're a sixth form college. Most of our partners are sixth form colleges as well. So we operate slightly differently to FE colleges. Leyton has all students doing GCSE, grade 0 up to 3, and that's 600 students. NewVic has 400 doing GCSE and then 400 doing functional skills. We have a high BMAE population at the college, and many students with English as a second language, which all brings added things to the teaching and the things to think about. NewVic had been thinking about trying to make some moves forward, some progression with their GCSE teaching, and these are some of the things that they were hoping to try and push forward as outcomes when they started thinking about this before the start of this year. So they were very keen to expand the joint planning and review process that they were doing a bit more of. Certainly been doing quite a lot at A-level, but hadn't been doing it very much at GCSE. They were very keen to spend more time thinking about building on the prior knowledge that students had and specifically addressing misconceptions that individual students had. Both of those two things really about trying to save time and be more focused in the work that they had with the GCSE students. They certainly wanted to try and engage students more in the learning process, a real feeling that students kind of turned up, accepted what was given to them in a lesson and then left. But wanted them to really be thinking a bit more about what they knew, what they needed to know, and how they were going to make that transition. They certainly wanted to think about some of the literacy issues they were facing with their students, meaning that students were struggling to access some of the multi-step questions, some of the longer questions. They wanted to work on that. And two overarching things, which are pretty true for most people, is how that impacted on students' attendance and their progress overall. So that's where they started from. And their thinking right at the start of the year was that they wanted to try to change their approach a bit and build on some of the things they were doing in other courses. So they've been looking at a dialogic approach, which they've been using a bit, again, at A-level, and wanted to expand it more to think about their GCSE students. This is Robin Alexander is someone who's been promoting this for some time, and this is his kind of view of what that might mean. So you're talking about engagements in the classroom that really have an impact, that really move away from teachers leading everything, dictating everything, and deciding where to go next. This is much more about a conversation, mainly between students, but also between students and teachers, that really explores what they know, what they don't know, what they can do next, and how they can move forward with that, with the teacher supporting that process. And I think their interactions, the questions, the answers and the feedbacks are all quite important parts of that process. So what they started doing right from the start of the year is within the department is trying to put together sets of 3 lessons for particular topics. And these would include kind of standard activities like recall and review starters and some targeted classroom teaching, but more activities that focused on some of the things that Malcolm Swan talked about in terms of activities that supported good practice in classroom. So activities that classified mathematical objects, interpreting multiple representations, evaluating mathematical statements, creating problems, analysing reasoning and solutions. And a lot of those things flow through the standards unit stuff that he put together, and that influenced this a lot. So, for example, the sequence activity at the top here was one that was used to try and assess prior knowledge in the first lesson. and what the students' misconceptions were, and the ability for students to kind of talk about what they knew and what they didn't, and share that knowledge, so that there was some learning going on straight away, even when there were misconceptions there. The matching activity on the left, which is a fairly common one, but these are very good at addressing those misconceptions, and the ability for students to share their knowledge within the group. And they're very good for self-checking as well, so that students can feel confident that they're getting the right answers. And the exam style question often came up more in the third lesson, but it was the idea that, one, it was the link to the exam, but it was also questions that made students try to think together about the different tools that they had in their toolbox that they could use to try and answer these questions. So those are examples of some of the activities they were starting to put together within those 3 lessons. At this point, they've been doing that for a few weeks. We then got involved at Leyton, and three of us, including myself, worked as a working group, an action research group at our place. We had a look at the lessons they've been putting together. We went over and observed them teaching some of their lessons, and then got involved from that point. So from there, some of the sub-questions started to come out that we were interested in. What are students' attitudes to attempting mathematical tasks? How do students collaborate during these activities? And how do students use mathematical language to support their learning? All key features that would make a difference to whether this kind of approach would be working or not. So we agreed to do an attitudes to math survey at the start and the end. We wanted to look at how students approached those bigger multi-step questions that was mentioned in the last presentation. Were they prepared to give it a go to get started on them, and were they actually able to make much headway? We were interested in observing small groups working, to answer those second 2 sub-questions, about how they were collaborating, how they were useful, and how did it kind of bring on the language that was being used. And obviously we were interested in teacher feedback as well. So we obviously managed to do that initial survey. I think what's quite interesting is we focused on this bit of the presentation just thinking about the students who said they didn't like maths. And you can see that 60% of those said believe they can still achieve. And it's quite interesting that even the students don't like maths, they still have a lot of belief that they can go forward with it. But what's interesting is when you get a bit more specific about the steps towards doing, making that achievement, that drops off. So when you ask them about talking about their maths, you're down to 48% who like doing that. And then when you ask them about whether they think their answers make sense, you're down to 33%. So it's interesting that drop. We also asked them to give us 2 words that summed up how they felt about maths, which is presented in the Wordle. And slightly unsurprisingly, you have got a small proportion that are positive about that experience, but most who have a very negative kind of feel about it. And yeah, some of the words in there make you as a teacher slightly depressed, but I suppose it's a starting point to work forward from. We did some observations throughout, not so easy to collect all that together by the end, but I've managed to summarize some of the ones I got together and put a few quotes in there, which I think summarize some of the interesting things that came out of it. We did really find that the right kind of tasks meant that students did talk more mathematically about what they were doing. We did certainly find that the normal kind of conversations you as a teacher might have with students in the class didn't always elicit the misconceptions that they had, and those really became apparent when they got down to doing an activity as a group, which was interesting. And one lesson that I particularly observed, which I thought was really interesting, there was a small group working on some exam questions, I think in a third lesson, who managed to answer the questions correctly, but when prompted about their final answer, ended up getting into quite a long discussion that kind of took them away from their confidence and made them think a bit more about what was going on, question what they've been doing, go back at it again, ask them each other some more questions, come up with some more examples, and at the end of that process, kind of really felt that they had a much deeper understanding than just getting the answer right. And I think that came from the fact that they got used to working this way over a period of time. If you have a look at the observation data, there's 3 lessons from NewVic and 2 from Leyton there. These were taken in the spring term, so NewVic had been working on this for a term already. We'd only just got started, and you can see some slight differences. It took us a while to get students attuned to this way of working, and hence we had to work on the engagement on it, whereas NewVic had kind of got that a lot more by that stage. But you can see the percentage of, this is about percentages of time working on things. You can see the amount of talking and listening that's going on, which I think is hugely valuable. In terms of a conclusion off the back of that, then the staff, certainly at NewVic, working as a whole team, were very positive about the process. It was something they bought into as a whole department, and it's something they worked together quite closely all the way through. They really enjoyed that joint planning and review element, which has been talked about quite a bit today, and felt that had really challenged them as teachers, but also taken them forward, which was really good. I think the experience at Leyton was slightly less so. There was only a group of 3 of us working on it. It wasn't the main thrust of the work that was going on in the department. So we made progress on this, but it felt slower, and it felt like we needed more kind of time to develop ourselves as teachers. I think we came in a bit too cold to it and needed to spend more time, training and thinking about these ideas first. Certainly, we felt the student motivation in lessons seemed to be more positive. The environment was more positive. Students were enjoying the opportunity to talk to each other about their life a lot more, which is really nice. We didn't get around to getting any formal evidence about the multi-step questions, but staff did say that from the stuff they were doing in class, they felt that students were showing much more confidence in approaching those things. And it'd be interesting to take that further next year and kind of really examine that with some proper evidence. Evidence a big issue this year. It's hard to know what impact that would have had on the final exams, and whether it takes a couple of years of experience for teachers working with it to really have an impact. So that'll be interesting to see how that might go in the future. Certainly at NewVic, they're very keen to develop this approach and build on it. They're reviewing all those materials at the moment, deciding which ones work best, deciding how best to use them, and that whole process of working together. But they feel like they've really established a foundation for students to talk to each other, discuss stuff. And the thing that they're very interested in at the moment, which we're kind of linking in with, is the idea of how that's going to change for next year. Very difficult to have such a dialogic approach when you're at home most of the time. So how do they approach that? And they've come up with some great ideas already, which we're talking about. So it may not be the same, but I think there are ways of doing it. I think it's important when we are doing stuff that's not face-to-face, that we still try to think about that kind of discussion element, that involvement, that engagement. It's not just about a teacher passing stuff on. And that's our project.